Listen to your breath. We'll point out that links to the book, to signed copies of the book, and to all other things relatively painless adjacent can be found in the chat window or the buttons about this video, should you be watching me from the future. This story is called Funeral. I don't understand, Lindsay said, but she lied when she said it. Why would I want to ship her up there when all of her friends and her life are down here in New York? Michelle's mother, strained to irritability at the end of the line, said, because we are her family, and this is how things are done. I don't need to explain myself to you, young woman. Okay, fine. Cape Cod then. Will you let me know when the date is locked in for the service and the burial? Michelle's mother, Arlene, responded very quickly. Oh, you don't have to come all this way. If you're not going to do it down here, I do. Arlene sighed. No, I mean, your attendance is not required. It's very sweet of you to want to pay your respects, but the truth is, people don't travel to the funerals of their roommates. Roommates? Yes, you two shared the place at, what was it, that address that was all just numbers and letters, 134 Avenue B, apartment 12C. That's the one, yes. But we didn't think of ourselves as roommates. You know that, right? Oh, I'm aware that you were close, yes, but that's not the point really, dear. Isn't it? This will really just be for family, you know. Yes. And maybe some close friends, family friends and school friends from up here on the Cape, that sort of thing. Yes. Could you let me know when that's going to? Arlene went on as though Lindsay had not spoken. And I think a lot of these people, I mean, at least some of them might be uncomfortable having you there, knowing you were, well, you know. No, I'm not sure I do know. Say it aloud. That you were close. Lindsay said nothing. She let it hang on the line. That you didn't think of yourselves as roommates. So, you have friends and family who are uncomfortable with people who love one another showing up at each other's funerals. Let's not be unpleasant about this, shall we? Mrs. Winter, I loved Michelle. We were together for 2.5 years, lived together for almost 2. I had planned to spend my life with her. She made me happy. And much of the time, I think I made her happy. I don't think I'm being unpleasant about this at all. Please, would you please let me know when you have the date set? I intend to be there for it. I don't want my daughter's funeral turning into some kind of political statement. Okay. This is not some fist raising, I don't know, feminist solidarity event. Okay. People will be dressed well and respectful. I promise not to wear lumberjack plaid. Arlene allowed that to hang heavy on the line for a moment. I promise to be as respectful as anyone. You know that I cleaned her up, right? What? Before the ambulance and the police got there, I cleaned her up. She shat herself when she went. Apparently that happens a lot. I undressed her and cleaned her up and put her in clean clothes in the time between making the call and answering the door. Why are you telling me this? Lindsay was not certain of the answer to that. She had said it without thinking. She thought it had something to do with proving that she was respectful, but it was more than that. It spoke to the level of intimacy, to the level of commitment. That wasn't it either. She had wanted to curse, even if only in context. She had wanted to shock this clenched, sphinctered wasp at the other end of the phone. She had wanted to offend her without shouting fuck. She said, I want you to know that I did what I could to take good care of your daughter. The woman made a grunting sound, that Lindsay recognized as a sound Michelle had made from time to time, a sound that Michelle had made at moments that Lindsay's father or brother would have snorted. Arlene said, "Well, you certainly did a fine job of that, didn't you?" The words stung, and Lindsay knew she had invited the attack with her gentle vulgarity. "Okay, just let me know so I can be there. You really just don't listen at all, do you? All you kids. Just do whatever you want with no regard for the people who might be affected. Is that what all us kids do?" I said as much to Michelle just last week. I said to her, "I know you think you're a romantic and rebellious, but you're just making a fool of yourself with the whole family looking like a bunch of crazies. Your shenanigans down there in New York." I told her she was headed down a path that could only lead to heartbreak. And then she goes off and does this. You said that to her a week ago? Of course, I didn't know she was so unhappy at the time. Maybe I would have said something differently if I had known she was so fragile. But of course, I'm not there, am I? I couldn't see her face, or I was just on the phone. It's so hard to pick up the signals when the only contact you have is long distance. Lindsay felt her jaw tensing. She heard the accusation and could not quite tell whether it was intended. Her mind fumbled through the distinction between implied and inferred, as a way to avoid the familiar rewind and replay of the last week's events. Her mind kept cycling through every recent interaction she had had with Michelle, every conversation, every passing glance, every brittle, silent breakfast, passing one another in the small kitchen space, respecting the pre-coffee irritation of close quarters and half-shattered dreams. She had searched for the missed sign so many times she no longer knew what was memory and what was projection. She said, "Okay, Mrs. Winter, I'll see you in a couple of days or whenever." Arlene said, "I'm serious. I would rather you not come." Lindsay said, "Nonetheless." She hung up. The long drive from New York to Cape Cod gave Lindsay time to stew. By the time she made the transition from the I-95 to the 195, the rage had simmered to a nice, thick seethe, a smooth reduction of resentment. Michelle's younger sister, Claudette, had called to tell her of the service, and it had become clear in the course of the phone call that she had not done so out of respect for Lindsay's wishes, or even out of respect for Michelle's relationship. She had called because she knew it would piss off Arlene and Lawson, her parents. Like any good adolescent, Claudette had couched her action in self-righteous outrage. She had feigned a deep concern for the recognition of the relationship, but unconsciously she let slip the telltale turns of phrase that broadcast her disdain for the pairing. The expression lifestyle choice came up, and freedom to experiment as the sorts of things she felt it was important to tolerate. The smell of the cardboard boxes in the back seat sometimes carried a slight scent of Nivea hand lotion, probably leaking from the bottle in the gathering of Michelle's toiletries. Lindsay had collected almost all of her late lover's belongings and put them in boxes to return to the family, keeping only a few items that she just couldn't bear to let go. There was a necklace that Michelle had never actually given to her, but she had allowed her to wear frequently, often requesting that she wear it, saying that the sparkle of the stone set off her aura, an ironic jab at their friend Denise, who read tarot cards and decorated her home in dream catchers of various sizes, wood and yarn constructs that, uncleanable, came to look over time like dust and hairball mobiles. Lindsay kept that necklace. She kept the hoodie that had once been her own, but that she'd given to Michelle, who said she had never owned a sweatshirt that didn't have a college or a club's name emblazoned on it. Michelle had made that her go-to running to the store or answering the door for the pizza guy throw on. She had worn it on Sunday mornings without a shower. It smelled of her in a way that made Lindsay feel like a safe and loving puppy when she put it on, or just held it to her desperate nose. She kept that and intended never to wash it. Everything else she had put into the boxes to take back to Michelle's parents. And as she filled the boxes, she decided with a snide sort of smirk that she would include the things they wouldn't expect. She included a half-empty box of tampons. She included a single sock with a hole in it that Michelle had used as a dust rag. Fuck them, she'd thought, throwing items into a box with aggression the recipients would never perceive. Let them throw out the personal trash. As the woods and the lobster roll shacks slipped by, Lindsay had conversations with an introjection of Michelle's mother, Arlene. She had conversations in which she railed at the woman for turning her grief into rage, for making it impossible to feel the loss and pain funerals are designed to serve, because she was all caught up in the anger and defensiveness sparked by her prejudice. No bigotry, use the word, she thought, indulging in an on-the-spot rewrite of the sort only imagined conversations allow. She thought wryly of the story she had heard about Walter Matthau, who, after arguing with his wife through a tour of the famous death camp, had snapped, "You ruined Auschwitz for me." The rural landscape gave way to cow pastures, and then a small town's main street grew up around her with its storefronts and post office. People walked the sidewalk, parked their cars, seeming to have no idea at all that a beautiful young woman had taken her own life, leaving the world lost in its own hallways, barefoot and chilly and too big to hold hands, but too small to cross the street alone. Then a left turn took Lindsay's car into the stone walls and evenly mowed lawns of residential wealth. Where trees grew, they were carefully spaced in deliberately random seeming arrangements so that wide slants of sunlight could bathe the lush grass where the underbrush should have grown. Everything took on the hyper-saturated look of an Ang Lee forest scene. Her mind skittered back through conversational glimpses of Michelle's childhood. She began to understand the eyes through which her world had been perceived, the risk Michelle had taken and the courage she had shown. Lindsay felt wholly out of place in these surroundings. A small knot in her solar plexus wondered for the first time ever how much of Michelle's affection for her had been nothing more than rebellion against an oppressive upbringing of expansive privilege. She immediately gave that small knot the voice of Arlene and told it to shut up. Wrought iron gates stood open, and she drove through on the road that wound past headstones and soft landscaping toward the chapel. Several cars, all bigger and much cleaner looking than her own, filled some of the paint-marked slots, but the parking area was far from full. Lindsay pulled into a spot just a little bit apart from the cluster of cars already there. She unfolded herself from the long drive and took a moment to stretch, turning her upper body from side to side to release her back. She rolled tension from her neck. She put one foot on top of the car and straightened the leg, pressing her chest to her knee. Then she repeated the stretch with the other foot up. She let out a long, slow breath, let out a soft snort that she recognized as her father, telling her she was being silly, stalling in the parking lot after driving all this way here. She climbed the 3 small granite steps to the entryway and went in, the stillness of the air inside striking her as a tactile reflection of the silence. She passed through the foyer and wondered if that part of a chapel had a specific name. She knew the benches were called pews. She knew something was called a rectory, but she didn't know what that was other than that it always made her think of men having butt sex because of a joke she had once heard someone do about priests and altar boys years earlier when she'd gone to see her brother perform at a nightclub. A woman stood at the doorway into the churchy part of the building, her back to the great space with the huge statue of Jesus looking sad and scary, arms outstretched and nailed up at the wrists, hands hanging limp as though a struggle to survive and effort to escape was beneath his dignity. He seemed to be wearing a diaper, and Lindsay's seething inner voice muttered, "I'll bet he shat himself when he went." The woman at the doorway took a single step toward her, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming. Please take a moment to sign the guest book before you come in." Lindsay recognized her voice. She said nothing, simply nodded and followed the woman's gesture. She went to the book and put her name in it, and then wrote in the space for notes, Michelle was the love I needed when I needed it. I do not remember life before her. I cannot imagine life without her. She stood for a moment, turning the pen between her fingers, wondering if there was more she should write. She set down the pen and headed inside to find a seat, a pew. After she had time to go look at the name in the book, Arlene chased after her, brisk walking down the aisle to where Lindsay was about to sit alone. Arlene spoke in a very soft voice. Her carefully maintained expression of polite grief made her lips move very little. I thought I made myself clear when we spoke. Yes, you did. She spoke quietly, but not nearly as quietly as Arlene. She heard a slight echo, like the reverb effect on a cheap guitar amp. Some people toward the front of the room turned to look. Arlene hissed, I am very uncomfortable having you here. I'm sorry I make you uncomfortable. She sat down. Arlene crouched so she might continue to speak in that tiny whisper that remained impossibly audible. Clearly, she had a good deal of practice having private conversations in cavernous spaces. This is a sacred space. I promise not to burst into flames. Arlene gripped Lindsay's arm hard with a single hand and pulled her upright with a violent tug. She walked the younger woman back up the aisle. Lindsay had taken a few steps before she thought to pull away. But Arlene's hand had strength developed over years of tennis and golf. Her hold held. She walked fast, and Lindsay stumbled once before she realized her options were to keep up or be dragged. She did not walk comfortably in heels to begin with, so the shoes chosen for their respectful femininity made the swift gait particularly difficult. She slowed for a quarter beat when they got to the lobby, but Arlene kept going and took her all the way out through the front door into the living air of the outside world. Only when the doors had shut behind them did Arlene speak. I don't know how else to say this, young lady. I do not want you here. My family does not need to have it rubbed in their faces at the funeral that my daughter ran off to do, whatever it is that you two were doing down there in New York City. Jesus Christ, you can't even say it, can you? Watch your mouth. It took Lindsay a moment to figure out what she had said that could be considered inappropriate. And when she did, she found she had no desire to apologize for it. You want me to say it? I'll say it. You should not be in this chapel because you're a pervert and a Jew, okay? Does it feel good to hear me say that? Does it make you feel superior to know that I'm one of those people with traditional values and a family I want to protect from all the crazies and the criminals? I knew when she said she wanted to go to Sarah Lawrence College what she was thinking. I knew, and I just let it happen. Wait, you let what happen? Your daughter was wonderful. You know that, right? She was by far the best person I ever knew. Lindsay wiped tears from her cheeks, but she wasn't certain what had drawn them out of her this time. She was such a bright and funny girl. And then just, look, you can watch the burial if you want, but I really don't think you should be in the chapel, okay? The service is about to start. And I just want to grieve for my daughter. Is that okay with you? Is that all right? Do you mind if I just sit inside there and feel the loss and I don't want to be angry, not today. I don't want today to be about you and her and all the lesbianing. Lindsay fought the urge to laugh, though she allowed herself a tight smile. It wasn't the confused verbing of the noun that got her. It was the sentiment so close to the one she had been imagining hurling at Arlene. She wanted to grieve without anger. She squeezed her nose and she snorted. Arlene said, what was that? Sorry, it's just Michelle did that. She did that when she visited last Christmas. Did she get that from you? She mirrored the gesture. Lindsay recognized it. She blinked. She might have. I got it from my dad, I think. I didn't even realize I'd picked it up. Arlene grunted that odd little grunt. She used to do that too. She used to do what? And Lindsay noticed that, like Michelle, Arlene pronounced the airiness of the at the start of the word. That little grunty thing, huh? She duplicated the sound. Did I do that? That's funny. Something my husband does. I don't even really know what it means. It means you found something interesting or funny, but don't want to admit it because it would feel like a concession of some kind. Arlene grunted. Then she chuckled. There it is again. Lindsay nodded. Okay, so you just, is this okay? You just wait out here, and in about, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes, we'll do the procession and you can be there for the burial. Her tone was so hopeful and so kind that Lindsay could see no way around it. Also, she'd begun to feel as though her only purpose in going inside had been to put a thumb in Arlene's eye. She said, yeah, okay, thank you. Arlene took Lindsay's hand in both of her own and made eye contact as she said, truly, thank you. Lindsay nodded, and Arlene stood there a long additional moment, not saying anything. But in her silence, a half dozen other thank yous broadcast through her touch. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for not hating me for my inability not to hate you. Thank you for not describing the way you had sex with my daughter. Thank you for giving my daughter joy in a way I couldn't approve of. Thank you for driving all this way, even if I told you not to. Thank you for giving me this small win. Then she walked inside and Lindsay sat down on the cold, hard step to wait. Distant, echoing music came from inside. Lindsay's ass went to sleep. She stood up, turned in small circles, waiting. She realized she could use the time productively, so she walked over to her car, opened the back, and began carrying the boxes one at a time from her car and setting them down in a neat stack near the cluster of cars she correctly assumed belonged to Michelle's family. Nobody in the chapel had looked like people who would have been her friends from school. They were all the age of Arlene and Lawson, except for two girls Lindsay knew to be Michelle's sisters, and one gangly young man that had to be the older brother, Kyle, who sat in the front row. As she carried boxes, she thought that perhaps she should have invited at least one or two of their friends to make the drive with her. It would have filled the space more, and it would have blunted Arlene's sense that she was under attack. She felt guilty. She knew, though she hadn't known until now, that she had invited nobody to come with her because she did not want to blunt anything. She had come to her beloved Michelle's funeral, attending as an attack. Claudette emerged from the chapel, and Lindsay recognized her as much by the adolescent affect as by the face she had seen in the rotating photographs on Michelle's screensaver. Michelle had come back from Christmas talking about how delightful Claudette and Delia were. She had described Claudette, saying that she had always been a serious and introspective kid, but now she was deep in her teens, so deep that she slouched around like a behemoth with an appointment in Bethlehem. Claudette pulled a cigarette pack from her purse and lit it with an old-fashioned looking brass lighter. She walked toward Lindsay with a slight limp that she had clearly learned from wealthy young black men in hip-hop videos. Lindsay snorted and set down a box. Claudette watched her get another box and add it to the pile. She moved to Lindsay's car and looked inside. She saw that one box remained. She leaned against the car, watching as Lindsay came back for the last box and pushed the door closed with her butt. Then she walked with Lindsay as the woman carried the box across the parking lot and put it with the others. Only when Lindsay had set the box with the others did she say, "You need a hand?" Lindsay snorted. Funny. But you'll refrain from laughing in the interest of time? I'm trying to be respectful. It's a funeral. My mom was pissed. Yeah, well, that's what you were going for, isn't it? Claudette raised her eyebrows as she dragged smoke into her lungs and blew it out through her young, perky nose. Then she came back in from talking to you and she was different. Yeah, I have that effect on people. Seriously? No, I agreed to wait out here till the burial. Give her some space. She's grieving. So are you. Yeah, but I don't need to grieve with an invisible friend. I don't know what that means. I'm an atheist, like Michelle. Yeah. Claudette smoked. Lindsay smelled the smoke. It made her think of her parents. It reminded her of childhood and Scrabble games and long rides in the back seat. Where do atheists go when they die? Lindsay thought about it for a moment. I don't know. Where do atheists go when they die? It's not a riddle I'm asking. Oh, I don't I don't think anyone goes anywhere when they die. They just go. So, you don't believe in life after death? My grandfather said he believed in life after death, but that it's the life of other people who haven't died yet. Is that supposed to be funny? Lindsay shrugged. Not today. Claudette crushed her cigarette on the asphalt. Lindsay walked back to the steps and sat back down on the cold stone. Claudette sat down next to her. They sat in silence for a long time. She wrote me a long letter about you once. Lindsay wanted to see it. She wanted to read it. She stayed silent. She feared scaring away the girl if she showed any eagerness, as though she was waiting for a timid dog to come close. She looked out at the headstones beyond the parking lot. She kept her breath steady, as if she had just bet big on a busted flush and hoped the guy in the cowboy hat would fold. The guy in the cowboy hat folded. It was a couple of weeks after she met you. She said she thought she had found the one. She said that she was more in love than she'd ever been. She said she was starting to believe in the possibility of joy and romance. It took her 2 pages to get around to the fact that you were a girl. Lindsay nodded. She really loved you, I think. I really loved her. I like boys. Lindsay nodded. Okay. The boys I like piss my parents off as much as if I like girls. Yeah, well, it's never easy. You know, they threatened to cut her off, right? What? When she told my parents about you, they said they didn't want everything they'd worked for falling into the hands of the wicked. Lindsay snorted. Yeah, wicked. That's me. Claudette shrugged. Lindsay said, the Wicked Witch of the Lower East. I don't know what that means. Don't worry about it. They didn't do it. Who didn't do what? My parents. They didn't cut her off, kept sending her money, left her trust intact. Lindsay nodded. She had known that Michelle got money from home, that she had come from money, but they'd never discussed the details. Even when she made you her inheritor and everything, they were furious, but they didn't cut her off. Lindsay blinked slowly. She suddenly had a great many questions. She had a great many questions that she didn't want to ask. Her world tilted abruptly. She focused on the sensation of cold, smooth stone under her fingertips. 2 hours earlier, she had filled her tank on a credit card, worried about how this trip on a weekday would affect her groceries budget. She had been forcing down thoughts of coming up short for rent and having to ask Mr. Norwalt for extra time to pay. She had wondered if she could go back to cleaning the studio in exchange for dance class instead of paying for it like a normal person. She felt self-loathing rise like nausea, and she fought the fantastic drift of imagined figures on a bank receipt. She realized the pause had been too long, but she couldn't speak. The sudden shifts in circumstance had devastated her ability to compartmentalize. She'd been so angry that she didn't feel she could grieve properly. Then she'd let go of the anger when she realized that she was doing to Arlene exactly what she had felt had been done to her, and had found herself sitting alone. She'd become calm and distant and practical. She had stacked the boxes neatly and had begun to think she had found closure in that act. Now there was money. She didn't know how much, but it was more than she had. She felt rage growing again, a fury born of the idea that now she had to deal with what that gift might mean, the idea that now she had to feel hope and greed when she should feel only sorrow and loss. Her hand began to tremble. Her fingertips barely touched the granite. Claudette said, "So it'll probably be fine, right?" What? She wondered if Claudette had been talking the whole time and she had been too involved in her own thoughts to listen, but she couldn't find a memory of words drifting by. They probably won't cut me off even if they don't like Keith. Lindsay remembered abruptly that the girl was a teenager. No, no, they probably won't. I don't know. I don't know anything. I should probably go back in before Mom notices I left. Lindsay nodded. Okay. Claudette stood up. She shook each of her arms in turn to get her sleeves to fall right. You gonna be okay out here? I'm gonna be okay. What are you gonna do? You know, grieve. Do you need me to bring you some Kleenex or something? No, thanks. I have some in the car. Later, when the family filed out, coffin carried by 6 men, 2 of them Kyle and a man she knew to be Lawson, Lindsay followed the group at a distance. She felt like an intruder at a garden party, a somber, boring garden party. She noticed that Kyle's suit fit him perfectly, that in his late 20s, he owned a tailored, bespoke black suit, so spotless that he clearly only wore it on rare, solemn occasions. She wondered again how much money Michelle had left to her. She did not know how such details got handled. Arlene dropped back from the group and walked with Lindsay in silence for a few steps. If you'd like to join the family now, I think that would be appropriate. I'm okay, but thank you. The men lowered the polished box into the ground a few yards away, and then Lawson glanced toward his wife, and she waved him off with a small gesture that said, "It's okay, I've got this," but looked to Lindsay as though it might mean, "I am petting the head of an imaginary standard poodle, but hope nobody notices." Arlene said, "Do you mind if I stand back here with you for a bit?" "No, that's okay." They stood in silence. You know, she had a will? Claudette told me. I don't really know how any of that works. Our lawyer will take care of it. He'll get in touch. Can you can you just contribute whatever she left to me to something good, suicide prevention, LGBTQIA rights or something? I'm afraid not. It has to go to you. What you do with it is, Lindsay nodded. Eventually, she would learn the number. She would have to find out what Michelle had risked for love. She would have to make decisions when the money was real, when the money was in her hands, and nobody was watching. She realized she was hungry and tried to remember when she had eaten last. Arlene said, "Will you do one thing for me?" I thought I already did. Arlene looked at the ground then, self-conscious, maybe ashamed. Right, right. She blew a long breath out through pursed lips, and Lindsay could see the wrinkles around the woman's lips, formed over years of long breaths blown out through those same pursed lips, deep grooves she tried to disguise with makeup. What do you want me to do? Just whatever you do with the funds, hold out enough to live on for a year or two. Her eyes twitched as though a bright light had startled her. Michelle told me you had important auditions coming up, that things are changing for you right now. Don't let anything distract you from that. Lindsay wondered how much Michelle had talked about her with Arlene. She wondered what Arlene had thought of in that moment that she squinted and then recovered her composure. She wondered how much money it has to be before it's called funds and enough can be held out to live on for a year or two. She said, "That's something you want me to do for you?" "Yes, for me, for Michelle, for me." They stood silent for a long moment. Arlene said, "I'm sorry I grieved at you." Lindsay chuckled. "Yeah, me too. I wanted to be a dancer." But the tiniest imaginable pause before the word dancer made Lindsay think it was something else that Arlene had wanted to be. She said, "I should go do the..." People were taking turns grasping a shovel and tossing dirt into the hole. "Okay, yeah. The older I get, the more time I spend throwing dirt. It's okay. I get it. I'm burying my daughter and doing word games. I don't know what's wrong with me." "Do you want to know one of the first things Michelle told me about you? That I didn't love her? I think she always thought I didn't love her. She never said that. I don't think she thought that. I was so afraid. That's what you wanted to drive up here to tell me. No. What did she say? She said, you were always ready to be taken aback by some effrontery. Arlene chuckled. Word games. Lindsay nodded. Suddenly, Arlene was hugging her and she was wrapped in someone else's mother's arms. Drowning in unfamiliar perfume and soft, soft fabric, Arlene said, I loved her in spite of it all. You know that, don't you? I do, Mrs. Winter. I do know that. She knew what in spite of it all meant, but she could not find anger at the words. She did not hear an attack. She heard an apology. She heard a confession. She heard anguish that hoped it could echo through the corridors of her love, to be perceived by a kind, beautiful dead woman in an imagined afterlife. That concludes Funeral, the fifth story in the Relatively Painless cycle. Once again, I will say, if you're interested in reading the whole book, getting a signed copy of the book, or signing up for the entire subscription period to see all of these, those links remain and will be again in the chat window for your convenience. That concludes the reading. We'll be moving on to the Q&A. Thank you. As always, this story will be archived at the website. And of course, we would love to see you next week. In the meantime, listen